And it seems like after day 2, like you're halfway through day 3 and you're kind of like almost getting a little bit bored. Like, man, I got a whole nother day off.
You know, if you really had that kind of a night where you didn't get much sleep at all, I mean, functioning with no sleep at all is equivalent to being intoxicated.
You are listening to EMS with your hosts, Erik Axene and Matt Ball.
So this is, we did a podcast, I think it was April of 23, and we discussed the 48-96 schedule.
So we're going to revisit that today.
Well, yeah, because back then, my department was still 24-48s, and we had not even at that time, we were investigating, we were looking into the option of going 48-96, but we hadn't actually done it. And so January 1st of this year, as you know, we went to 48-96, and the department that you work for also went 48-96 in January. And so it's a hot topic. I know, at least in this area, it's a hot topic. I've talked to some firefighters in other states, and it's there's different schedules, but it's one of the schedules that's being talked about. So this is kind of a 6-month, 7-month review of the 48-96 schedule, and how do I like it? How do the guys that you work with like it? And
well, why don't you walk through how you felt on the 24-48 and how you feel now being on the 48-96? I mean, I think it's probably the most important thing.
Yeah.
It's just how your experience has been in your department.
Yeah. So as you know, I mean, I worked 24-48s for 19 years, so a long time. That was very used to that schedule. And it was fine. I mean, it was okay, but you definitely felt like you were constantly coming back to work. You either just got off or you're about to go back in, constantly. Didn't have a lot of like real rest downtime at home, especially if you had any kind of a side job.
Right.
Since 2020 with COVID, obviously we were getting a tremendous amount of overtime. So, I mean, our overtime has been through the roof since 2020. It's slowed down a little bit. But for 2020 and 2021, it was like we were working 48s and 24 off, really.
When you work overtime, what percentage of the time would you say it's mandatory versus you choosing to work overtime?
Back then, with COVID, it was about once a month we were getting hit with mandatory overtime. That's about
it's better now, though.
Oh yeah, it's much better now. Yeah, it's slowed down a lot. The overtime has slowed down. I mean, overtime is one of those things that firefighters, they love it or they hate it. It's feast or it's famine, right? You've got a certain, and I think this is pretty true through most departments, that you have a certain number of guys that love to work overtime. That's what they use as their side job. And then you've got other guys that absolutely hate it. They never want to work overtime. They're always trying to give up their mandatory shifts. So it's much better now. You know, you can put your name in and for the most part still get overtime if you want it, but you're certainly not getting mandatory every month, which is a nice thing.
That is nice.
So we switched to 48-96 in January. And I will preface this whole conversation, as you know, with I'm at a little bit of a slower station. So we do have an engine and a med unit at my station, but it's a little bit slower, which is nice. So the busier stations, I've talked to those guys because we have stations that run 20 calls a shift, 40 calls, about 35 to 40 calls within a 48-hour period on the med unit. That's a lot. That's a whole lot. And so they work with the crews, the station captains. It's kind of up to their discretion, where if they try to swap off, if a guy just, if two guys got hammered, if they're at a 4-man staffing station, at a truck station, and there was 2 firefighters on the truck, then, they can switch halfway through the tour, they can switch out.
That makes sense.
But yeah, I've talked to guys at our station 2, where you know where that is, and one guy in particular who's one of our FTOs, and he rides that thing almost every shift, and I've been asking him, and he's like, it's really not that bad. Even when they're super busy, it's really not that bad. And I think because he knows he's about to have 4 days off, right? Yeah. He's going to go home and he's going to have 4 days off. And the first time you're at home for 96 hours, you're kind of like, this feels weird, right? You're without taking a vacation day. I'm home for 4 days straight. Yeah. And it seems like after day 2, like you're halfway through day 3 and you're kind of like almost getting a little bit bored. Like, man, I got a whole nother day off, right? So by the time you actually go back to work, you're ready to go back to work. You're not dreading the fact that, oh man, I got to go back to work. I think even, again, talking to the guys and the folks that are at busier stations, even if they got 30, 40 calls that tour, they're not really dreading going back to work after a 96-hour off period. We had taken a resiliency class, and I think we talked about this in the previous podcast, and we were just talking about it, about how you, with the 24/48, you get off, and then, you get home and you're kind of winding down, and you don't really get all the way down before you have to go back to work again. Right? You're going back to that alert state. And these folks that came in, it was a resiliency training that my department did. And this counselor lady, she was telling us that it takes about 72 hours for someone's body to kind of recover. Like if you had a really bad call. Right. And you kind of have some trauma from that call, some emotional trauma from that call. Whether we want to, admit that we have trauma, we get trauma, right? We see traumatic things. And so when you see those things, she was telling us that it takes about 72 hours, chemically and otherwise, for the body to kind of come down from that state, right? So when you're on that 24/48s, she's like, you're never out of that state. You're constantly in that high alert, switched on state, right? You're just ready to go all the time, even when you're at home. Where with the 4896, you have that 72 hours and then you have an additional day where you're now all the way down. You've come down, you've had 2 or 3 good nights of rest at home.
Does that 72 hours start when you get home, or could it start if you had that terrible call at the beginning of your 48?
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I think her point was more like we're always, firefighters, police officers, when we're on duty, we're always kind of switched on.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
that's true.
Now that trauma, yes, I would think if you ran that trauma at the beginning of your tour, at the end of that call, but then you're not really coming down because you're constantly going on more calls throughout the tour. Yeah. So you're never really getting a chance to relax. You have to get totally away from
really
it.
let down.
Yeah, the tones, the calls, the training, everything.
Yeah, I hated sleeping on call in the hospital. That pager was so heavy on my waist.
Yes.
And I didn't sleep well because I was just waiting to get interrupted. My sleep to get interrupted, waiting for a call to go down to the ER to admit somebody to the ICU or whatever it had to be.
Yeah.
And when I sleep at the station, it's almost like PTSD for me as a resident.
Yeah.
When I'm sleeping in the station and I'm just waiting for the tones to go off.
Yeah.
Wondering if I'm going to get a sleep or not.
For sure.
So I taste a little bit as a medical director when I do a ride out at the station and stay overnight.
Sure.
But something I remember is that this is every shift.
Yeah.
Every shift.
Yeah.
For my guys at the station. For you.
Yeah, it's every time you go to bed. You're. Excuse me. It's been kind of nice being at a slower station where luckily we don't get a lot of calls at night. But the station I was at previous to that was one of our busiest stations. And so we were always getting up at night.
Well, when I was out in LA City talking to some of the firefighters out there, they were talking about how, all through the night getting called out to transients. There's big homeless problems, some of these urban areas where we are.
Yeah.
I was talking to some of the folks out here in some of the urban areas in our Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex where up all night they know where they're going to go. Yep. It's where the dart's going through their jurisdiction. Yep. And the homeless population, there's always
that's where they settle at
call.
Night.
Exactly. And so anyway, so in some places I could see how the 4896, and you've kind of alluded to it, it may be a little bit more difficult to implement. But I do believe, though, that the benefits could be seen at a busier station. Yeah,
I know our chief came from another department, and they had 4896. And they ran, it was a fairly large metropolitan area where he came from. And they ran a considerable amount more. They certainly had more stations, but they didn't have the equivalent number of stations as they did the increase in call volume. They ran quite a few more calls. I believe they had 22 stations and ran about 100,000 calls a year, where we have 10 stations and run about 25,000 calls a year.
Oh, I see.
So it was like double the stations, but 5 times the call volume.
Yeah.
So much, much busier, and they loved it. They loved 4896. He was a huge proponent of it. And I've talked to other guys that have going to conferences and stuff. I've talked to other folks that do the 4896. And another schedule is a 2472,
Yeah.
which I've heard is kind of gaining some popularity, where you're on for 24 and then you're off for 72 hours. So I'm not sure if that would be better, but
And there's I know the schedule in California where I was. It was like it varied. It's like you're
they do like
for
one on, one off, one on, two off kind of a thing.
something like that.
Yeah, there's some departments here that do that.
I can't remember there was a name for that type of schedule. I remember, but yeah, it was a bit peculiar in its the randomness. It's not random.
It wasn't right,
yeah, but it wasn't the same every time.
Yeah. There's a department I think in West Texas that they have a D shift as well, and it's like one on, one off, one on, two off, one on, four off, something strange like that.
I think that's it. Actually,
it's something odd like that. So yeah. It's different, and this has been an adjustment for sure. I think that we've said this multiple times at the station. It's weird when you drive into work the first day of your tour, and you're there, and that's all kind of normal, right?
Yeah.
But then that second day, when you get up, you're like, "Oh, I'm not going home," and you get up and you go have coffee, and you kind of start your day over. That's been a little bit of a change. It's just been different.
Yeah.
But. It didn't take long for us to kind of get into a routine of what we're doing.
I was talking to some folks at a department I was teaching out there recently, and they wanted to go 4896, and they're in a 2448.
Yeah.
And a lot of the obstruction or the barriers to that change are the chiefs, honestly. Administration.
Yeah.
And I've heard some of my friends who are chiefs and have told me it's frustrating when you want to see somebody, and if they take vacation, they're not going to be in the station for almost days. For at least 10 days. So it's that's been an administrative complaint, and then it's I'm sure there are other things too. What have you heard why people don't like the 4896? Because I know one of our friends has said he doesn't like it, and he has a family situation where it creates a lot of difficulties with his children.
Yeah, having young kids, the wives are if their wife stays home, 48 hours straight. If you've got 2 or 3 little kids, that's probably really hard. Yeah. So again, it's not perfect for anybody. I wouldn't think. There's certainly guys in my department that were not proponents of the 4896. There was some thought that that second shift, those guys are just going to be lazy. They're not going to do anything, right? And so I think it's really important that the station captains and the battalions, they properly run their stations and their crews, right? Make sure that guys are doing what they're supposed to do. Make sure you're getting your training in. Make sure, you're not just laying around being lazy. That certainly could happen on that second day. On the flip side of that, that station officer also has to be mindful of the fact that
when you say station officer, you
so
mean
the station captain or
whatever.
Lieutenant. In my department, we don't have lieutenants. We only have captains. So, like our station captain has to be mindful of, hey, I was on the truck and we only ran 5 calls the first day of the tour, and the med unit ran 15 calls, and they ran 3 calls after midnight. So those guys are probably tired, right?
Give them a break.
So let them go back and maybe get an hour or 2 of sleep. Right, and everybody runs their crews and their stations a little bit differently. So I think as long as the officers are mindful that, hey, if they got hammered last night, like let them, maybe they'll sleep in a little bit longer. They don't have to be up at 6 a.m. or 7 o'clock. Let them sleep in a little bit, get some rest.
Do you miss anything with the 2448? Or is it?
I really don't. I really don't miss anything about it. Again, 2448 wasn't bad. But I in the 20 years, coming up on 20 years that I've been in the fire service, I feel like I have been at home more since January of this year than I have in the last 19 years, whatever.
Wow, that says something.
Yeah, I feel like I have more. I don't have to rush. Like if you have a project that you want to get done at home, I don't feel like I have to rush to get that project done because I got to go back to work tomorrow. Or if I'm working a side job, I only have one day at home with my family, and then I got to go right back. The other plus to the 4896 is the way that the schedule rotates. I have way more weekends off. I have way more full weekends off, which, my girls, they're in school, or if my wife's working, like they're only off on the weekends, right?
Yeah.
Or most guys, their wife might only be off on the weekends. Well, at the 4896 or the 2448s, you're working almost every other weekend, 1 or 2 days.
Right.
With the 4896, there's like 3 weeks where you work a Saturday, then you work Saturday,
sense.
Sunday, and so you have 3-4 more weeks where you have the whole weekend off. So, and then the vacation, you take a tour off, and you have now you can take one half of that tour off, take the first 24, and you got 5 days off.
Right.
You can take the full tour off, and you're off for 10 days, and that's nice. I really enjoy it. I feel like I have gotten better sleep when I was doing 24/48s. About 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon, no matter what, I would be wiped. I'd have to lay down and at least get 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Oh yeah.
Mr. I go to bed early?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, I go to bed early, but then I also wake up super early, as you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, every day I would have to. It was like I never got fully rested. I don't feel like I got fully rested. Again, this was also when I was back at a busier station. Now with the 4896, I don't feel that as much. I mean, firemen still love their naps. We still love nap time, but 2 o'clock every day, I don't feel like, oh my gosh, like I can't keep my eyes open.
Well, I think you bring up a good point with the naps is sleep. The 4896, and from a medical perspective, I think could be the most detrimental thing of a 24/48 shift is that you really never get the good sleep.
Right. Even when you're off.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, you think about it. I come home, I work a 24-hour shift. I come home, I get to sleep in my bed, right? I don't have to, unless I've got something going on, I don't necessarily have to get up early the next morning and go be turned on again.
Right.
That next night, no, I'm up at 4 o'clock going to work, got to be turned on again.
Yeah.
Now with 48s off, I come home, I sleep, I get 3 good solid nights of sleep, and then that last night, okay, now I sleep and I got to get up and I got to go to work.
Yeah.
And it's, like I said, I feel like I've had more time at home. I feel like I'm more rested than I have been. Most of the guys that I've talked to in the department, it's for the most part been positive. I've talked to other guys in other departments, and their take on it is very positive. We were talking about downsides earlier. You'd asked about downsides. The scheduling thing, like you talked about.
Right.
Another issue has been the payroll. I know that has been an issue with some cities. Is the payroll, because it changes like the cycle, or we had an issue with that, trying to figure out the pay cycles and working with payroll and finance to work all that out. But it can be worked out.
Yeah.
It can certainly be worked out. But there's chiefs and there's people that absolutely have, put their foot down and said, we are not doing this. We are not going to that. I don't know.
With your family, you said that you felt like you had a better connection with them. So family relationships have improved, and you feel like you're spending more time with your family, doing some of the things you want to do.
Yeah, it's like you're home for a greater amount of time. You're gone for a greater amount of time. At the end of the day, it's the same amount of time when you calculate it up over a year. It's the same amount of time.
It's just grouped up different.
But it's grouped up different. And so it's not as sporadic. And so, like, I'm doing the away time in a bigger chunk, which means I'm doing the at-home time in a bigger chunk.
Right.
And it gives, I don't know, it just, even though it's the same amount of time, it feels different. It feels different when I'm home more. Like I say, I feel like I have more time to do stuff. I'm not in a rush to do stuff. If my wife and I want to go out and do something, like, I got to get home because I got to go to work tomorrow.
You've got more time.
You have a lot more
flexibility.
Time. It's been nice.
So it's undeniable that it's helped. Well, as long as you like being home. As long as you like the people.
As long as you like being home. Yeah, if you don't like being home, it might not be the schedule for you. That's for sure. Yeah.
How about the relationships at the station? Have you noticed a change when you're there for 48 hours with your colleagues? I mean, that's 48 straight hours. Have you noticed this change in the dynamics at the station?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have not. I have a good crew, senior guys. My captain I've worked with since day one of my career. He was a firefighter when I got hired on. We're good friends. So I am very lucky that I have a good crew. I could see where if you didn't like your crew, or you had a bad crew, or you had a bad station officer, where 48 hours would be a long time to spend with those guys, or those people. But I'm lucky in that I have not seen a change in the dynamic. It's basically like we go in and our 24 schedule, we just kind of repeat it for that next day, and it's just the same thing. So it's kind of been the same. Now, the one thing that's been interesting is the cleaning, which little things, like anything, there's little things that you don't think about. So when we were 24/48s, we would cook dinner, right? And then after we would cook dinner, that's when we would do our station clean. That's how my crew did it. Is after we finished dinner, we get the dishes, we cleaned all the dishes, we cleaned the kitchen, we swept and mopped the station, we got everything cleaned up, and then we were done. The station was ready for the oncoming crews. I know some departments, they do it in the morning before they get on. That's how we did it. So with the 48s, that was one thing like, well, do we have to clean twice? Like, do we have to mop just to mop? Like, are we just checking a box? Or it doesn't make sense to mop it.
So do you just do the cleaning on the second day?
That's what we do. So what we do is we go to the grocery store like we normally do first half of the tour, the first morning of the tour. And then the first night, obviously we clean up the dishes and clean up the kitchen.
Right.
But we don't do the big station clean. We just kind of do the dishes clean up, the kitchen clean up, and then we're good. And then the second day, that's when we do. Now, obviously, if something needs to be done, we'll take care of it. But as far as just the routine cleaning, that's been one of those interesting things that we didn't think about. Like, oh, I guess we don't have to clean now. We can wait till tomorrow and finish it up tomorrow for the next crew.
Now, does your station have a schedule for things they clean? Like, I know at one of the stations I'm at, Friday they clean the kitchen.
Yeah.
Monday is like a motor Monday. They do the small engines, and I think windows were Thursday.
Yeah. Everybody does it a little bit different. Every station in my city, every station does it a little bit different. Sundays or Saturdays in my department wide is apparatus detail day. So on every Saturday, like I worked last Saturday, and that's the day that we get. Now again,
clean them up.
Yeah, no matter what, they get cleaned on Saturdays. They get cleaned, and we do a full clean, like we talked about in our stretcher safety lecture. Like we pull the cot out, the whole back of the med unit gets wiped down. We go through the cab and wipe everything down. We do a real deep detailed clean. Now again, if it gets dirty during the week, we still wash them off. But that's our apparatus day. And then Sundays, usually every week, is kind of how we'll do it. Is that on the Sunday, whoever's on that Sunday. If it's I don't remember what the schedule is, but the first Sunday of the month is the kitchen. The second Sunday of the month is the bathrooms. The third Sunday is whatever.
Oh, okay.
That's kind of how we do it. So whenever you're working on that Sunday, you have something that you want to focus on.
So everything gets cleaned monthly?
Everything gets cleaned, at least monthly. Like the bedrooms get a full detail. Again, the apparatus bay is probably the one that gets the most dirty. Like Saturday, when we were cleaning apparatus, I just went out and blew out our bay because it had some cobwebs and stuff. But yeah, the scheduling, the cleaning stuff, just little things like that you wouldn't think about. Not an issue, but it's been interesting to see, okay, how do we do this now with this new schedule? It's been interesting.
Here's something else that concerned me with the 4896, and I've asked people about it. In fact, like I said, we were just talking about this at another station here locally, and one of the concerns for me was if you're on a 48-hour shift and you have a bad night your first night, and the next morning your chief or whoever has got you guys doing a bunch of community work or certain training or whatever it might be, certain things you got to get done. After a night with no sleep, your second day, and then you start getting these calls. It's like you're sleep deprived, and as we've talked about, if you really had that kind of a night where you didn't get much sleep at all, I mean, functioning with no sleep at all is equivalent to being intoxicated. Do you guys have safety measures in place where if that type of night happens, you mentioned the guys on the engine would come and take over for the med unit, but is that something you've had to experience? Do all stations do that, or is that just something that... No,
do the swapping with the guys?
Yeah, or have a system in place where if something bad happened, where I could see maybe in some of the stations I've been to, it's like, hey, I'm
tapping out.
I'm the... Well, or where the guys who have more seniority...
Oh, yeah.
It's like, well, hey, you're on the med unit. You got to work your way up the chain.
Yes.
And then,
yeah, and that's how it used to be for sure with the 2448s, is that the senior guy typically would ride the fire apparatus, and then the newer guys would be on the med unit, right? And with the 4896, that still holds true. Again, this is very crew and station dependent, right? Yeah. Officers have to run their crews. I would hope that the senior man is doing his job as the senior man, which is, hey, if your new guys just got their butts kicked last night and they ran 20 calls yesterday, like jump on the med unit, let them get a break. Like do 12 hours and 12 hours. Like, hey, I'll ride at the first 12, you get on the engine, you get a break, and whatever the case, however you figure it out. Because we don't have 4-man staffing, so sometimes there's only one guy to replace 2. So they have to kind of figure that out. So to answer your question, First off, I don't work in a super busy department. Yeah, we certainly have our stations that run a lot.
It's getting busier, though.
It is absolutely getting busier. Yes, and we have our stations that run 15, 20 plus calls per shift, or 30 plus calls a tour, which is a lot. But it's not like a Dallas where they're consistently running 20, 30 calls in a 24-hour shift. It's not like that. And so our chiefs, our battalion chiefs, our station officers are pretty mindful. We don't have we got to do our training and all those kind of things. But then the station officers should be mindful of, hey, we had CEs today, or we had ISO training today. The med unit guys were up all night. I'm going to let them go home and relax and take a nap, get caught up on some sleep. So kind of like how we talked about in our sleep lecture about those little micro sleeps, help. Like even if they go back and get 30 minutes, that helps. And we have not had any issues directly related to like sleep deprivation so far, knock on wood. We haven't had any issues since January of, this person was just conked out and they made a medication error or something because they were too tired from working the 48s. We have not experienced that, to my knowledge.
Is there, have you noticed, and I know we're just about to finish up here, but have you noticed a difference in trends of opinions with gender? Do the women tend to like the 4896 as much as the men? I mean, we're all wired differently.
Yeah.
Not all women are moms. Some aren't married, some are.
Right.
Everybody has a different family sort of a feel.
Yep.
But for those women in your department that have children, I know, and I believe anyway, that women and men are kind of wired different. It's maybe easier for me to leave the family for a couple days than for my wife, who's got this unique bond with the kids. It's
a mother bond.
She doesn't love the kids any more than I do.
No, it's just different.
It's just different.
Yeah.
Has there been anything you've observed with...
I don't have a female on my crew or at my station. We have several females throughout the department. I do know of one female that you and I both know that she's a single mom, and she has a lot of comp time. So she works a lot, and she will get a lot of comp time on top of her vacation time. And so she will take a 12-hour part off or something so that she can be home with her kids. And has kind of adjusted her schedule to match with her kids and be there for her kids. So I haven't heard expressly from any females that they don't like it for that reason, even from the moms that we have in our department. But it's like one of those things. Everything, there's pros and cons and everything, right? You work a 40-hour work week, you're away from your kids for 40 hours, Monday through Friday for 8 hours a day, you're gone. Yep. This is a different kind of a deal. This gives you a lot more, even though you're gone for a greater amount of time, now you're home for 96 hours, right? You got 96 hours to spend with them. So I have not specifically heard any of our... Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that, but I haven't heard any complaints specifically from our female firefighters about that. Like I said, I know of the one that she will take off quite often, just like 12 hours just to get a little break to be with her family. But
well, this is good because, when we did this in April of 23, it was projection, and I've heard this, and now you've experienced it for more than half a year, and I'm only hearing positives.
Yeah, and I assume the guys in your department all love it.
Yeah. No, it's all very positive. In fact, some of the guys that initially thought they may not like it, love it.
Yeah, our guys that didn't like it and were against it won't. I don't think they'll admit that they like it now. But
and the Chiefs too that were a little leery. I've talked to them. They're dear friends of mine. Yeah, and they're like, it's a new system now, and they're used to it.
Exactly.
And it's
what are the two things
the guys are happy.
Yeah, two things firemen hate: changing the way things are. So it is change.
I do want to add one thing.
Yeah.
One thing, and it's staffing. The competition in getting candidates. A lot of people have been kind of strong-armed into going 4896 just for staffing.
Absolutely.
That's something we didn't really talk about, but
it's an issue.
It is.
Yeah, there's a lot of chiefs that have put pressure, or guys are putting pressure on their chiefs like, hey, if you want to get quality candidates here, they can go to the city next door that's working 4896, or they're not going to come here. The pay's the same. That's a added bonus for them.
Sure is.
And so it is definitely a recruitment tool for a department, I would say.
Well, I'm glad you're happy. As a physician, I think you're taking better care of yourself. I think it's more healthy for you, and we'll talk about that on a later podcast. But this is cool. It's really cool to hear that it's better for you.
It's been good
and
stuff.
the department.
Yeah,
I like it better.
See you on the next one.
Be safe out there.
Thank you for listening to EMS, the Erik and Matt Show.